Nobody inside NASCAR expected Kevin Harvick to say something so heartbreaking this soon, because when Harvick compared Kyle Busch's death to the day Dale Earnhardt died back in 2001, the entire NASCAR world instantly went silent. Fans weren't just shocked by the comparison, they were stunned because Harvick is one of the only people in NASCAR who truly understands what a tragedy like this feels like from the inside. This is the same man who stepped into Richard Childress Racing after Earnhardt's fatal crash, and now he says Kyle Busch's death created that same emptiness across NASCAR again. But what made everything even heavier was what happened during the Coca-Cola 600. Samantha Busch arriving at the track, Kurt Busch fighting through tears, and the number 8 spot left empty during pace laps. And honestly, some of the reactions from Dale Earnhardt Jr. and longtime NASCAR rivals may surprise a lot of fans watching this video. So stay all the way until the end, because the deeper NASCAR starts talking about Kyle Busch's impact, the more painful this story becomes. For more than 2 decades, Kyle Busch wasn't just another NASCAR driver. He became one of the biggest personalities the sport had ever seen. Whether fans loved him or hated him, people always paid attention when Kyle Busch showed up at the track. He brought controversy, confidence, intensity, and drama almost every single weekend. Over time, NASCAR became a sport where Kyle Busch felt impossible to ignore. That's why Kevin Harvick's comments hit the racing world so hard. Because Harvick wasn't speaking like someone trying to create headlines. He sounded like a man genuinely struggling to process what NASCAR had just lost. Harvick explained that the feeling surrounding Kyle Busch's death reminded him of what NASCAR experienced after Dale Earnhardt's fatal crash in 2001. Obviously, Harvick made it clear the situations themselves were different, but he said the atmosphere inside the garage felt painfully similar. And when someone like Kevin Harvick says that, people listen. This is a driver who personally lived through one of the darkest moments in NASCAR history. After Earnhardt's death at Daytona, Harvick suddenly became the driver chosen to replace one of the biggest legends the sport had ever seen at Richard Childress Racing. So when he talks about the massive impact of losing a superstar driver, he's speaking from experience very few people can truly understand. Harvick described the loss of Kyle Busch as a huge void inside NASCAR. And honestly, fans have already started noticing exactly what he means. Because now, NASCAR feels quieter. For years, Kyle Busch was always somewhere in the middle of the conversation. If there was drama, Busch was probably involved. If there was controversy, Busch probably had an opinion. If there was a huge race moment, fans expected him to become part of the story somehow. That's why so many fans online started describing him as NASCAR's main character. And strangely enough, that description actually makes sense. Kyle Busch always knew how to make people react. Sometimes fans cheered him. Sometimes they booed him louder than anybody else on the track. But either way, he made NASCAR feel alive. Now suddenly, that energy is gone. Several reports explain that fans and drivers were especially stunned because Kyle Busch had still been actively racing shortly before the tragedy happened. Fans had just recently watched him competing, arguing on the radio, and battling for position like always. Then, just like that, everything changed. That shock completely surrounded the Coca-Cola 600 weekend. Instead of feeling like a normal race weekend, the entire event turned into a tribute for Kyle Busch. And honestly, some of the moments before the race became difficult for fans to watch. Kyle Busch's wife Samantha Busch arrived at the track alongside their son Brexton and daughter Lennox. Seeing the Busch family there instantly reminded everyone how personal this tragedy really was. Then came one of the hardest moments of the weekend. Kurt Busch walked into the Charlotte infield carrying 8 white flowers as a tribute to his brother. Fans watching could immediately see how painful the moment was for him. And honestly, watching Kurt Busch trying to stay composed while honoring Kyle made the reality even heavier. NASCAR also made sure Kyle Busch's legacy remained at the center of the event. The number 8 position was intentionally left empty during pace laps to symbolize his absence. A giant number 8 logo appeared across the track. The crowd participated in a moment of silence before the race began. According to many fans who attended the event, the atmosphere felt completely different from a normal NASCAR race. People weren't only there to watch racing anymore. They were there to grieve together. That's another reason Harvick's comments became so important. Because Harvick defended NASCAR's decision to continue racing despite the painful circumstances. He explained that Kyle Busch himself would have wanted the racing community to keep moving forward. Harvick described racing after tragedy as part of the healing process, and for longtime NASCAR fans, that mindset probably sounded familiar. NASCAR has always been a sport built around resilience. Even during painful moments, the garage finds ways to come together. And according to Harvick, that unity became very visible during the Coca-Cola 600 weekend. Drivers, teams, crew members, and fans all seemed connected by the same pain. Not rivalry, not competition, just sadness. But what made Harvick's reaction even more powerful was hearing him talk about his relationship with Kyle Busch personally. Because for years, those two pushed each other harder than almost anyone else in NASCAR. Their rivalry became one of the most intense storylines in the sport. Fans remember the arguments, the confrontations, and the frustration between them over the years. At times, it genuinely felt like they couldn't stand each other. But that's what made Harvick's reflection so meaningful, because he admitted that over time, their rivalry slowly transformed into mutual respect. Harvick explained that competitors like Kyle Busch forced everyone around them to become better drivers. The pressure Busch created every weekend made rivals work harder constantly. And once Kyle Busch was suddenly gone, many people inside NASCAR realized just how much influence he truly had over the sport. Even Dale Earnhardt Jr. struggled while talking about Kyle Busch. Earnhardt Jr. admitted he was having a hard time processing everything, and much like Harvick, Dale Jr. also reflected on how his relationship with Busch changed over the years, because there was definitely tension between them at different points in their careers. Fans remember moments where the rivalry felt very real, but eventually, that tension evolved into friendship and deep respect. Inside racing, the fiercest rivals often end up understanding each other better than almost anyone else. They understand the pressure, the criticism, and how exhausting the sport can become mentally. And in Kyle Busch's case, almost everybody respected how hard he competed. Even the people who battled him the most. Right now, the hardest thing for many NASCAR fans is accepting the reality that the sport has entered a completely different era. For over 20 years, Kyle Busch always felt like part of NASCAR's identity. Love him or hate him, he mattered. That's why Kevin Harvick's comparison to Dale Earnhardt carried so much weight. Not because the situations themselves were identical, but because both losses created the same emptiness inside the sport. Because when someone like Kyle Busch leaves NASCAR, the impact goes far beyond statistics or championships. The sport loses energy, the garage loses personality, and NASCAR loses one of the few drivers capable of making every single weekend feel unpredictable. That's why so many people left the Coca-Cola 600 shaken, not only because they were honoring Kyle Busch, but because they realized NASCAR may never truly feel the same again.